Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is joining us exclusively in just a minute. A short time ago, he announced he will recuse himself from any investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. The whole drama began 24 hours ago when the Washington Post reported that Sessions had failed to disclose meetings with the Russian ambassador during his confirmation hearings. Since then, Democrats on the Hill have been going all out, with many demanding that he resign immediately. The president, meanwhile, issued a statement tonight describing the attacks on the Attorney General as, quote, a witch hunt. Attorney General Sessions joins us now. Mr. Attorney General, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you.
So here's the timeline as I understand it. On January 10th, you were asked during your confirmation hearings by Senator Franken if you'd had any contact with the Russians, and you took that to mean in your capacity as a surrogate for the Trump campaign. And then a little over 2 weeks later, Mike Flynn was forced to resign because of conversations he had with that very same Russian ambassador. And so my question is, from that point, February 13th until now, why did no one on your staff come to you and say, hey, we had conversations with the Russian ambassador, perhaps we should amend our statement to the Senate in order to avoid the problems that Mike Flynn had?
Well, Tucker, the question came to me was from Senator Franken, and he went into a great length saying that that day some new story had come out and said that various Trump surrogates were meeting continually with Russian officials as part of the campaign. And he raised that question with me, and my answer went straight to that. It's the first time I had heard that, so I focused on that I had not had any such meetings, was not meeting with Russian officials on a continuing basis to advance any campaign agenda. Sometime before that, I had met in my office in an official way with the Russian ambassador, and so that was the answer I gave, and I think it was an honest answer, Tucker. I thought I was responding exactly to that question, and it really became a big brouhaha, and I was glad to have the chance to kind of respond today and explain it.
I guess my question, I understand all that, and I take you at your word, that you meant that you had not contacted or had any contact with the Russian government or its representatives in your capacity as an advisor to the Trump campaign. My point, though, again, is that a little over 2 weeks later, the National Security Advisor has to resign because of conversations that he had, also in his capacity as a non-surrogate for the campaign, with the very same ambassador. So did anyone on your staff say to you, holy smokes, perhaps we should clarify this because you could see how it could be a problem?
No, I never gave that a thought, never considered it. I don't believe anyone ever mentioned that to me in quite different circumstances to me, Tucker, unrelated.
Okay.
So we just had, go ahead. So I had a meeting in my office with two senior staffers, both retired military people, non-political, and we had a meeting with some 25 ambassadors in recent months while I was senator, and the Russian ambassador was just one of them.
Right, but he was also at the very center of countless news stories and of accusations by Democrats that the campaign was influenced, pardon me, by the Russian government. So it just seems like a red flag might have arisen. What was the nature of your conversations? You had said, I think earlier, that they did not pertain to the campaign. And yet there was an indication today from an administration official that there was conversation about the campaign. If you could clarify.
I don't know what that would be referring to, but I would just say that we had a conversation that he came in and we talked about a number of issues. One of them was the Ukraine, and we had a disagreement over that. The Ukrainian ambassador had been into my office for a meeting the day before, and so we had a little disagreement over the Ukrainian issue. So we had a number of discussions like that, Tucker, but I don't recall any discussion of the campaign in any significant way. It was in no way some sort of coordinating of an effort or doing anything improper, and I don't believe anybody that was in that meeting would have seen or believed I said one thing that was improper or unwise. And it was really a sad thing to be attacked like that, but I think we've explained it, and we intend to move forward.
According to news reports, you met twice with the Russian ambassador in person, Ambassador Kislyak, and had one phone conversation with him. Is that the extent of your contact with him, those three? events?
I don't remember whether I had a phone call conversation with him or not. I spoke at the Republican convention at a conference with some 50 ambassadors. After I spoke, I walked down from the podium and mingled with a number of people, and we met at that occasion and had a chat. Otherwise, and I left shortly thereafter. So that's the only two times that I recall having met him. Perhaps I have. I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and sometimes you meet people like that, but I don't recall having met anyone, met him any other time.
Why did you recuse yourself from this? I mean, I understand your position is none of these conversations had anything to do with the campaign or your capacity as an advisor to the campaign, but you've recused yourself. Why?
Tucker, we had started when I got confirmed. I told the Senate during that process that I would review issues before me to determine whether or not I should recuse myself. Recusal is not an admission of any wrongdoing. It's simply that whether or not you can be perceived as fairly deciding a case or evaluating a case. And so I committed to do that. After I became Attorney General, and I've only been there 3 weeks, we met with professional staff, ethics people to discuss this issue, and we had a full meeting a week or so ago and planned to have a meeting today. It was on our schedule to make a final decision about whether or not I should recuse myself. And the reason I believed I should recuse myself is because I was involved in the campaign. To a degree, I think it would have been perceived is that I wouldn't be objective in participating in an investigation that might involve the campaign. I do not confirm or deny any investigation. I just felt like I should clear the air, and we were moving toward that end even before this latest flap.
So does your recusal extend to, say, an investigation into the leaks that led to the departure of General Flynn?
These things have to be decided on a case-by-case basis. Anytime anything comes up connected to the campaign, I would be recused because I've made that clear. If something else comes up that's not related to the campaign, we would go through the same process as I committed to the Senate, and that I have done, and that is to see if there's a reason I should not be involved in the case. So I think I've performed exactly correctly for an Attorney General of the United States.
Now, you were a foreign policy advisor. In fact, you were the chairman, I think, of the foreign policy advisors to now President Trump. In that capacity, do you remember conversations that you had as a campaign about Russia? And was there did you have any belief that they were putting their thumb on the scale, rooting for President Trump over Hillary Clinton? What were your conversations about Russia?
I never had any conversations about, with the Russians about this campaign and putting them assisting in the campaign or anything like that. I went out and spoke, and I campaigned for Trump, but I was not involved in anything like that, you can be sure.
But did the campaign, I guess my question is, did the campaign believe that the Russian government, the Putin government, favored Trump over Clinton in this race?
I have never been told that. I've never been told that.
Do you think they did?
I don't have any idea, Tucker. You'd have to ask them.
Right. Do you think, I mean, the core allegation here from Democrats and some Republicans on the Hill have suggested that they don't think it's a crazy idea, that the Russian government influenced the outcome of this election. Do you think that that's true?
I think the evidence is, people are bringing forth evidence, and there are congressional committees that are investigating that, and I believe the truth will come out. It usually does.
Huh. Do you think there has been any evidence uncovered to this point?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not going to make a judgment on that today.
But there's an investigation in progress, and so wouldn't that suggest that, I mean, I guess my question to you is, you often hear that allegation and the suggestion that there is actual evidence, and there must be some in order to have triggered an investigation, or no?
Well, you know what in the newspapers, and you know that the Congress is investigating now, and the intelligence committees and other committees may also investigate. That will just have to play out, and as it always does in a democracy. So
we just received a call from your office, and I'm hearing from my producer that they are saying that there was not a phone call between you and the Russian ambassador that's been included in press accounts. Was there?
I don't recall any such phone call,
You don't recall any such phone call. Do you think that if this investigation, which I presumably you can't comment on, is going forward. You just said that suggests that there is evidence. Is there some other point to it? What is the point exactly of this investigation?
I am not going to comment even of the existence of an investigation. That's improper for the Attorney General to do so, and I will not comment on that. That's part of the standards of the Department of Justice.
Right. So your position is you're just recusing yourself from any investigation into anything relating to the Trump campaign. I've
made that statement clearly in writing as to what I've recused myself on.
Okay.
Yes.
And will you be amending the congressional record or the official record as to your testimony on January 10th about your meetings with Russia?
I'm going to submit, yes, a supplement to the record. My response went to the question, as I indicated, about the continuing surrogate relationship that I firmly denied and correctly denied, and I did not mention in that time that I had met with the ambassador, and so I will definitely make that a part of the record as I think is appropriate.
So my final question is, why do you think the Russian ambassador wanted to meet with you a couple of times? What was their objective,
I didn't have a meet with him a couple of times, Tucker. I met with him after I spoke, and we chatted on the floor of this meeting, and then he called to meet with me. I literally met with 25 ambassadors during this period of time, and many of them were attempting to sell their country, assert the issues that they thought were important to their public safety and their issues that they felt were necessary for them. And I just listened, frankly. Very little occurred in those meetings, but I kind of enjoyed them. It was a good experience.
Well, I don't think it implicates you to describe what their agenda is, but it is of interest to everybody else. I mean, they clearly went out of their way to talk not just to you, but to other members of the Senate and to General Flynn, et cetera. I mean, but they were clearly trying to sell their position on something. And what was your impression about what their objective was? Like, what was the issue that mattered most to them?
You know, I'm not sure. The thing that really caused him to push back was a discussion of the Ukraine, as I recall. And as I described it, everything everybody else said about the Ukraine and what Russia did was wrong, and everything Russia did was right. He was sort of the old-style ambassador, in my opinion, and that was perhaps the thing that he wanted to share. But I'm not sure what was primarily on his mind.
Have you asked the people who are in the meeting, the one sit-down meeting with the two military aides, their recollections of this?
A little bit, yes. We've discussed it.
And their memory is the same as yours? They don't recall exactly, but Ukraine was at the center of it.
Right. So the question here is, I don't believe there's anything wrong with a United States senator meeting with an ambassador from Russia.
Right.
You know, I see you ask a lot of questions about it, and that's fine. But I think it was a perfectly reasonable meeting. I had professional, non-political staffers with me, and we discussed some important international issues. I learned something perhaps in that meeting. I usually did. And so that's what happened. People were, ambassadors were coming by to see me pretty often.
So the president, whom you serve, has described these questions as a witch hunt and has said that we need to investigate the leaks that have led to this and to a bunch of these different stories. Do you agree with that?
Well, we are having a lot of leaks today in Washington that I do believe are troubling. A lot of it would appear to be in violation of the law, and it's an unhealthy trend, and we've got to do better about it. I do believe every department needs to take a greater interest in maintaining proper security.
Do you see this as a witch hunt?
I don't think what was said about that meeting I had with the Russian ambassador was legitimate. I think it was hyped beyond reason, and I think it was unfair. And I was glad to be able to address it today.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions, thanks all for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, while everyone else was arguing about how Sweden was affected by mass Muslim immigration, one British journalist decided to go there and find out. She'll tell us what she found. Also welcome a Democrat in Congress who says the Attorney General we just spoke to has committed an unforgivable sin, ought to be fired, perhaps even sent to prison. We'll talk to that member coming up. Well, ever since President Trump described the supposedly dreadful immigrant situation in Sweden, journalists at every media outlet from here to Malmo have been debating how bad things really are there. They're fine, say a lot of them. Well, Katie Hopkins works as global columnist for the Daily Mail. Rather than going on Wikipedia or reading some Vox article to learn what to think, as most do, she decided to actually go to the country. She went to Rinkeby in Sweden, in the immigrant-dominated suburb of Stockholm that was torched by rioters last week. What did she find? Katie Hopkins joins us now. Katie, thanks for coming on. First of all, good for you for actually going. You always learn a lot when you get on a plane and go to the site. What did you expect to find, and how did it differ from what you found?
You know, I expected to find what a lot of people have been saying. It's like, there's nothing wrong, Sweden's beautiful, I live here, I see none of this. You know, I expected to see the Sweden I imagine from maybe Christmas cards or whatever. But, you know, when I got there, it's a very different story. Within 10 hours of landing, an asylum centre was burnt down, arson suspected. There was a hand grenade planted in a bin. And when I rushed there to find out what had gone on, I was told, well, why politicise this? Journalists are blamed, you know. Why make this a political thing? Why can't it just be a hand grenade in a bin outside a police station and a mosque? And I kind of felt like, oh, who's the mad one here, me or you? And then speaking to the women in particular, there's a much quieter story that's not being told, which is that women are frightened to go out. When I went to Rinkeby in the evening, I was the only female, certainly the only white female. And when I spoke to the ladies, it's because they're terrified of the crime. They're terrified of the gangs. And one particular lady I spoke to, she runs home at night because she's fearful of all the men that gather at night under the bridge where she lives. So they're kept indoors. So it's a really frightening place for a lot of women there, particularly.
Well, the irony, of course, is that Sweden is the original feminist success story, and its own government describes it that way, as the first truly feminist country. And yet you're saying that Swedish women are afraid to go outside?
Absolutely, and that was exactly the point that made me kind of mad, you know. I was saying to them, but Sweden's always been the aspiration. You guys have the best maternity leave, the best paternity leave. You're seen as the epitome of a society that's truly evolved. And the funny thing was, after I put up my first article for Mail Online, a lady, a stranger, came over to me in a cafe and she said, you've got to keep going. You've got to keep speaking out on behalf of these women because they have been silenced. And funnily enough, or curiously enough, the lady, let's call her Lucy, that is too scared to go out of her apartment that was broken into last week and she had her car torched, she said she was frightened to have her picture taken because of the feminists. Because if she spoke out, she would be labelled a racist and they would hunt her down. So the feminists are now working against the women of Sweden, and they call them the extremists now. Feminists are the new extremists in Sweden, and they are part of the problem, part of the mafia that are silencing the problem that Trump, thankfully, spoke out about.
Yeah, it's not so different here. I mean, our media, as you know, worked feverishly to downplay any reports there might be a problem in Sweden. They're dishonest and politically motivated, so that wasn't surprising. What is surprising is how many Swedes are apparently afraid to say what they really think about what's happening there. Why is that?
Absolutely. There's this absolute belief, 80 years of liberal politicians, there's an absolute belief that Sweden is utopia, and that's the only message you can send. There's absolutely mandatory belief in multiculturalism, and there's an absolute reluctance to understand that when these individuals leave Eritrea, Somalia, Afghanistan, they don't just arrive in Sweden and then miraculously, you know, join the multicultural dream. No, they bring every war, every fight, every hostility with them. And there in Rinkeby, in Sweden, you have the Eritreans who hate the Somalians, who hate the Afghanis, and that's just brought with them. And we have the same in Calais. When I went to Calais to address the migrant situation, they're exactly the same. The Somalians don't speak to the Eritreans, who don't speak to the Afghanis. And absolutely, Sweden won't acknowledge that. They won't acknowledge they've got a problem, because that would mean admitting that everything they've believed in, multicultural ideas, are wrong, and that they shouldn't have let in 200,000 people in 2 years, and they're about to let in another 400,000 over the next 4 years. So this problem is not going away.
They'd rather destroy their own country than be called racist. I recognize that. Katie, thanks for joining us. No, you're a brave reporter.
Thank you very much indeed.
Up next, President Trump spent the day at a naval base in Virginia. We'll tell you what he did while there. Also talks to a Democrat who says Jeff Sessions needs to resign immediately and perhaps go to prison. Stay tuned, where he pushed his plan to strengthen the U.S. military. For more on that visit and its consequences, we're joined by Fox News correspondent Trace Gallagher. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, standing on board the newly commissioned $13 billion USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, President Trump called for the largest increase ever in military spending. The 15-minute speech didn't carry nearly the weight of his address to Congress on Tuesday night, but it did mark the second time in a row a Trump speech has garnered praise well outside of Team Trump. And today was more than what he said, but also how he looked, apparently boosting his presidential aura with a flight jacket and a USS Ford ball cap. Watch.
What an honor. You know, they just gave me this beautiful jacket. They said, "Here, Mr. President, please take this home." I said, "Let me wear it." And then they gave me the beautiful hat. And I said, you know, maybe I'll do that.
During Trump's address to Congress, Democrats found it hard to stand up for the president, but some left-leaning publications and political pundits indicated that Mr. Trump was starting to embrace his position. Time magazine writing, quote, "It was perhaps the clearest sign yet that after 40 days in the West Wing, the president is beginning to come to grips with the public responsibilities of the office." The New York Times headline read, quote, "Trump offers up a more helpful vision." And Politico saying, quote, "Trump tries on normal." Even liberal analyst Van Jones, who used the phrase white lash to describe the election, said this after the speech. Watch.
He became president of the United States in that moment, period. That was one of the most extraordinary moments seen in American politics.
Even his worst critics were left to admit that at the very least, the president hit some of the high notes. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, thanks. Well, in contrast to his quick firing of National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, President Trump has signaled he's got no plans to move against his attorney general, despite all the news today. Just a short time ago, the president released this statement, quote, "Jeff Sessions is an honest man. He did not say anything wrong. He could have stated his response more accurately, but it was clearly not intentional. This whole narrative is a way of saving face for Democrats losing an election that everyone thought they were supposed to win. The Democrats are overplaying their hand. They lost the election, and now they've lost their grip on reality. The real story is all of the illegal leaks of classified and other information. It is a total witch hunt." Well, that statement has not satisfied Democrats, of course. Congressman David Cicilline is a Democrat representing the state of Rhode Island. He serves on both the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committee, and he tweeted this today. If the Attorney General lied under oath, he must resign and then face the consequences for committing perjury. Congressman Cicilline joins us now. Congressman, thanks for coming on. Perjury, that
great to be on with you again.
Thank you. It's good to see you. It seems like maybe you're getting a little ahead of the story if you're already mentioning perjury.
No, look, I think what we learned today in the last 48 hours is very disturbing. The Attorney General of the United States testified before the American people and before a Senate committee and gave false testimony. He said that he did not meet with Russian officials during the course of the campaign. We now know that that is not true. He had 2 months from the time he gave that testimony to correct the record. He did not. I think it's very, very concerning. This is the top law enforcement official of the United States.
Right.
We hold him to a very different standard than an ordinary citizen. He's responsible for prosecuting people for crimes all across America. I think it is impossible for him to continue in that position, having testified under oath falsely. And I think it's in service to our country. He should step down. I think that's in the best interest of the United States and should be treated like any other person who offers false testimony.
Right.
And wherever that takes it, it takes it.
So just to be totally clear, your standard is if the Attorney General says something in Congress, it turns out not to be true, he needs to resign and face perjury charges, A. And B, you don't buy the Attorney General's explanation that he believed that Senator Franken was referring to his capacity as a campaign advisor.
No. First of all, I don't think that that's credible. This is there has been information released by 17 intelligence agencies of the United States that came to the conclusion that the Russian government interfered with the American presidential election for the express purpose of helping Donald Trump. There have been now 4 officials from the Trump campaign that have left service of President Trump because of their ties to Russian officials. And it's in that context that that question was asked. The notion he's the only one of 26 members of the Senate Armed Service Committee that met with the Russian ambassador, the only one. And the fact that he originally said, I don't remember such a conversation, said that last night. Then he remembered today at his press conference some of the details. I mean, this is just not credible. But the reality is, when he gave that testimony under oath, it was not true.
Okay, so if that's the standard,
I mean, as you said in the question, you asked a very important question to the Attorney General. He had 2 months to correct that. He didn't. And look, this is not an ordinary citizen.
But hold on, wait. I think it's a fair question.
Law enforcement official in the country.
Hold on. You heard my interview.
Absolutely.
I thought I raised real questions.
You
but
did.
I'm just interested in the standard you're setting. I mean, I've been in Washington since childhood, long enough to remember May of 2013, when the then Attorney General Eric Holder said in public, I had nothing to do with surveillance of reporters who might be involved in writing critical stories on the administration. He said that, and it turned out to be a lie. And Congress had a vote on censoring him, and you walked out of that vote. And I just wonder, I mean, that is a very clear double standard. There's no question that he lied. He admitted he lied, and you were not willing to stand up and be counted.
That is absolutely not the case. You have the Attorney General of the United States in this case.
No, it is true.
Testifying to the American people and testifying to his colleagues in the Senate that he did not meet with Russian officials when he did. And the reality is that, it seems to me, disqualifies him from maintaining a position as Attorney General of the United States.
Look,
this is, again, in the context, by the way, just let me finish.
Okay, you're not going to answer my question,
We have a very serious question about the integrity of our American presidential elections. What's alarming to me is that
I don't think I can sit through. If you're going to give that lecture, I have to ask very specific questions. Here's what they are.
No, I'm not giving you a lecture,
because I've gotten this lecture 1,000 times. Raises questions the integrity of our democracy. How specifically are you alleging that the Russian government influenced the outcome of the election? You raised this question, and you're implying it. I want you to state, what are you talking about?
17 intelligence agencies of the United States.
And how exactly did they say Russia? Okay, since you've read their reports, how exactly did they say they influenced the outcome?
So let me finish. Let me finish the answer. I'm happy to answer. They document a very sophisticated campaign at the direction of Vladimir Putin that included fake news, online blogging, the hacking of the DNC, the release of emails, a very sophisticated campaign with one purpose, to undermine the Democratic presidential candidate and to let Donald Trump. That's not my conclusion. Look.
Let's not shout over each other. I've got a simple question. Is there any evidence that any of those efforts, which have been going on, by the way, since 1920, the Russian government's always tried to influence our elections, and they always probably will. Is there any evidence at all, and if you have it, please state it, that those efforts resulted in any change in the outcome at all? Do you have any evidence of that?
We don't know that because it had to do with changing the voters' perception. But there's evidence that they hacked into our election process. We'll never know that.
What do you mean they hacked in? Did they break into voting machines? What do you mean they hacked in?
No. They hacked into our system where they released emails, where they broke into the DNC, where they did online blogging, fake news. Those things presumably affected some voters' judgment.
Should that be illegal?
But the reality is, they did online fake.
They wrote things you don't like.
Did you read the report? So the point is, of course they had some influence on voters, but the reality is Donald Trump is our president. Hillary Clinton lost the election. I know he's our president because I was there when he was sworn in. That's the reality. But that doesn't change the fact that the Attorney General of the United States should not testify before a Senate committee and before the American people falsely and remain in that position.
I just want to throw this at you because I think we're probably on the same side on this. Today you had 2 Democratic senators suggest that we were now in a state of war with Russia. Jean Shaheen, she said this was an act of war. Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, quote, it was an attack on our country. Where's this going? There seems to be, these are drumbeats for war against Russia. I cannot believe you are for that. I don't think most Americans are for it. Reassure me now, when you have U.S. senators saying things like that, what are they talking about?
No. I mean, I think what they're talking about is, look, Russia has been engaged in efforts all across the world to undermine Western liberal democracies. You see it in France, you see it in Brexit. So
in Brexit?
You know, that's happening. This happened in America.
They're behind Brexit,
so we
too?
have to. No, I didn't say they're behind Brexit. I said Russia has been involved in elections all across Europe to underline Western liberal democracy. We should take this very seriously. It's not just a Democratic issue. We have a lot of fine Republicans, Senator Graham, Senator McCain, who have raised this issue. This is about protecting
I'm sorry, we're out of time, but I want to come back and
I
want to explore how the Russians are responsible for Brexit and Marine Le Pen. And I hope
No,
that
I
you
didn't
will
say
come
they're
back.
responsible for Brexit. I'd love to come back, though.
Okay. Thanks, Congressman. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Up next, President Trump is taking America toward a trade war with China, some say. We'll talk to a journalist who says that's a war that can be won, but with a different strategy. Plus, a family in Oregon was fined $135,000 by the state for refusing to violate their religious beliefs. The media call them contemptible. We'll talk to them directly about why they did it and what next. War with China could be imminent as President Trump continues to push a protectionist outlook on global trade. During his recent speech to Congress, the president lamented that America has lost 60,000 factories to China since 2001, and he vowed to bring some of those factories back. Michael Schuman is a journalist. In a recent piece, he wrote that it's possible to win a trade war with China. It may be worth trying. But President Trump seems intent, he said, on fighting a kind of enemy that no longer exists. It was an interesting point. He joins us now from Beijing. Michael, thanks for coming on. So,
thanks for having me.
You take China seriously as an adversary to the United States, more seriously, I think, than a lot of Americans do. You have a lot of knowledge on the subject. If they are, in fact, our main competitor with global trade, how do we approach that? What's the wise way?
Well, we have to be smart about this because I think we need to take a tougher stand on China, but we don't want to do it in a way that's going to be very damaging to the U.S. economy, right? So rather than throwing on kind of blanket tariffs, which could potentially be very destructive, hurt U.S. consumers, hurt U.S. companies, you want to be smart about it. You want to be very, very specific in targeting exactly how we want to fight China and counteract what China is doing. The real threat from China going forward is that China wants to move up the value chain. They don't want to just make a lot of stuff anymore.
Right.
They want to design it. They want the technology. They want to take on America's top industries head on. And that's what we really have to worry about going forward.
Okay, so they don't want to make plastic garbage or balloons anymore. They want to design the next
Exactly
iPhone.
right. Look, a lot of people get a lot of people get all fussed about, okay, where are iPhones made? But the fact is that, yeah, I mean, iPhones are made in China. But the fact is the real value in an iPhone is not the process of actually putting it together. It's the chips, it's the design, it's the technology,
Right.
it's the branding, and that generally is not Chinese. Now what the Chinese want to do is say, hey, we want to make whatever the next big breakthrough product is. We want it to be Chinese technology, Chinese chips, Chinese brand, and we want to sell it to Americans, everyone around the world, which mainly means they want to run companies like Apple out of business.
Right. And that's game over for the United States if that happens. And so...
well, right now, yeah.
Well, there's the belief that the Chinese
Right now,
government and the
US
military have stolen key American trade secrets on a vast scale. Is that true?
There's been a lot of concern about Chinese cyber theft, not just of military secrets, but also commercial technology. It's a very, very big problem for American companies. But even beyond that, what we're seeing here happen in China is that the effort to upgrade here, to start developing robots, electric cars, microchips, that kind of thing. This is a state-led national agenda with tremendous state resources behind it, money behind it. And that's what we have to counteract. I think some of the ways of doing it are, as I said, rather than throwing up tariffs, things like that, one idea that's getting more and more attention is to use an approach of what's being called reciprocity, which is, hey, if American companies can't do something in China or they're restricted from doing business in some way or investing in some way, well, then maybe we should match those restrictions on Chinese companies doing business in America. And that would not only start to curtail some of the predatory practices of Chinese business and government, but it would also probably pressure the Chinese to open their own markets more to American companies, which is great for American business, would actually start bringing down that trade deficit that Mr. Trump is very worried about as well.
Yeah, that seems like a smart approach, and you've obviously thought about this a lot. Michael Schuman, thanks for joining us from Beijing.
Thanks a lot.
Up next, a bakery battle. We'll talk to the owners of a bakery who were given a huge penalty by the state for not violating their own religious beliefs. They join us next. Well, the U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, of course. In fact, it's the reason this country exists in the first place. But increasingly, the law in many states is making it harder to be both religious and gainfully employed. Melissa and Aaron Klein were formerly the proprietors of a company called Sweet Cakes by Melissa. It was a bakery. But after refusing to provide a cake for a same-sex wedding, the Kleins were fined $135,000 by the state of Oregon. Last year, they had to close their bakery as a result. They're still fighting, though, and today their case was heard by a state appeals court. We're joined tonight by the Kleins, along with Hiram Sasser of the First Liberty Institute, which was representing them in court. Thanks a lot for joining us, all of you. First, to you, Melissa, there's been so much reporting on this, and so much of it is coming from a very specific perspective that is hostile to you, that I just want to establish exactly what happened. You all did not refuse to serve customers because they were gay, as I understand it. You merely refused to participate in any way in a ceremony you believe violated your religious beliefs. Is that a fair distinction?
Well, actually, Tucker, I have to kind of interrupt. There's a gag order in this case where it's actually being interpreted by one of the commissioners at the Bureau of Labor and Industries that they can't even really talk about what actually happened. And so we have to be very careful because of this gag order. So it's not just the...
Wait, I'm going to stop you there. What do you mean you can't talk about... I mean, not only... So they're dismantled the entire First Amendment, the religious liberty part and the freedom of speech part. Why can't you describe what happened, something that's been described in a lot of news stories? I don't understand.
Yeah, hey, that's exactly what I can tell you what happened a little bit, but unfortunately, the Kleins, they're gagged by this gag order. That's part of what this case is all about. It's not just about being fined with, or actually damages of $135,000. It's just such a soul-crushing penalty that put them out of business. That's not good enough. Now, actually, there's an extra part, and you can't really talk about it. And so that's part of the case that's going on right now.
Let me ask a much more general question. And I think people have read a lot of stories about this, and I just want to be totally clear. As a general matter to both Kleins, did you have a practice of not serving gay people because they were gay?
No, we had no such litmus test for customers. We served everybody, no matter who they were, every walk of life. I mean, that's part of being open to the public.
And these two women were, in fact, return customers.
Right. Okay, so they've been there before and you served them no problem. So I think we can all assume that the problem was you didn't want to participate in a ceremony in any way that you felt violated your religious beliefs. So my question to you, and I've been thinking this since the story began, what do you make of the coverage of this? The Oregonian, which is your newspaper, one of the newspapers in Oregon, described this quote, and they used quotation marks around the phrase religious liberty, as if it was a concept they were unfamiliar with or something only right-wingers cared about. Do you think this case has received fair coverage?
It really depends on what news outlet you go with. I mean, we've seen a lot of false stories out there, a lot of things that totally mischaracterized us, what happened. And really what it comes down to is, I mean, it's hard to find truth in media when it comes to things like this because there's so much misinformation out there.
Right. So you've been, as I'm sure you know, characterized as hating gay people when it's much more specific. Now, to your attorney, correct me if I'm wrong, but the precedent this sets is that the state can force people to violate their religious beliefs. I mean, presumably they could force, I don't know, a kosher butcher to sell bacon or a Catholic hospital to commit abortion. Or your religious beliefs are no protection against force from the state. Is that correct?
Yeah, what's unfortunate about this is that we have people of goodwill on all sides. And, we live in a pluralistic society. We've got to try to figure out how to get along. And what we're just simply fighting for is tolerance and respect and the dignity of all people to be able to carry out their lives in the way that they see fit. And everyone struggles how to both follow their faith, but also interact with others. And it's just really sad that the government has decided to come in here in Oregon and put their thumb on the scale and say, no, your beliefs, your way is wrong, and we're going to punish you with basically a lifetime crushing penalty.
Of course, abetted by their mindless handmaidens in the press who hate you for other reasons, cultural reasons. So when are we going to find out the outcome of this? When's the ruling coming down?
It's going to take a number of months probably before we receive the ruling, but whatever the ruling is, I'm fairly certain that one side or the other will appeal, and this will probably make its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so people can follow this case at firstlibertyinstitute.org at our website.
Let me just be totally clear. You don't have to be a Christian or even a religious person to have an interest in the outcome of this. It affects all of us in a deep way. Thanks a lot for joining us, all of you. Yep. Thanks.
No, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We'll be back in just a minute with an update on an important story we've been covering, so stay tuned for that.